Think about the last thing you remember before you fell asleep last night. Maybe you remember pulling up the blanket, the softness of the pillow, or the faint glow of the street lamp through the curtains. But you don't remember the actual event of falling asleep. It's a fundamental gap in the human experience. Every single person on Earth loses a few minutes of their lives every night, a digital edit in the movie of our consciousness, where several minutes of footage are simply cut and discarded. We call it falling asleep, but neurologically, it is less like falling and more like vanishing. Scientists refer to this as sleep onset latency, but that doesn't explain why our memory simply fails to record the bridge between waking life and dreams. If you try to catch yourself in the act, you'll find that it's impossible. By the time you notice you are sleeping, the transition has already happened. The moment itself remains elusive, a ghost in our biography. It's as if your brain's recording light turns off just as the plot gets interesting. This strange amnesia isn't an accident. It is a profound byproduct of how our brains handle the transition from the bustling activity of the day to the restoration of the night. Why can't we witness our own departure into the dream world? The answer lies in a complex dance of brainwaves, structures, and chemistry. As you lie there in the dark, your brain is far from silent. To understand why your memory fails during the transition to sleep, we must first look at the invisible symphony of brainwaves playing inside your skull. During the day, while you are alert, solving problems, or even just scrolling through your phone, your brain is dominated by beta waves. These are fast, high-frequency signals representing the quick processing required for interaction with the outside world. As you begin to relax and close your eyes, the music starts to slow down. The brain moves into alpha waves, rhythms associated with peaceful wakefulness and visualization. You might still be thinking, but your engagement with reality is thinning. However, the real change happens as you descend into stage 1, NREM sleep. This is where theta waves take over. Theta waves are much slower and more rhythmic, and they signify the departure of focused, waking logic. Imagine a busy office building. Beta waves are the frenetic typing and shouting of midday. Alpha waves are the sound of people packing their bags and dimming the lights. Theta waves are the sound of the cleaning crew moving methodically through the halls. When you move from beta to theta waves, your perception of time and sensation begins to distort. Sound might seem amplified or strangely muted. Your internal monologue starts to become abstract or fragmented. While you feel like you are still conscious, your brain is shifting into an entirely different mode of operation, a slower pace that isn't optimized for the high-intensity data collection that waking life requires. This slowing of internal rhythms is the physical baseline for the memory gap. If the signal isn't moving at high speed, the detailed logs of current events don't have the bandwidth to be filed away. To find the physical culprit behind our nightly amnesia, we have to look deep into the center of the brain, to an area called the hippocampus. Shaped like a seahorse, this critical structure is your brain's recording studio. Its job is to take sensory information from the day and convert it from short-term snapshots into long-term memories stored in the cortex. Throughout your waking hours, the hippocampus is a hive of activity, constantly tagging experiences so they aren't lost forever. But the hippocampus is one of the very first parts of the brain to disconnect during the process of falling asleep. As we start the transition into those slow theta waves, the biological relay system between the hippocampus and the cortex begins to weaken. Think of it like a warehouse supervisor who clocks out 5 minutes before the rest of the workers. Even if things are still happening on the assembly line, there is no one there to sign the manifests or ensure the goods reach the final storage. Recent neuroimaging has shown that even if a person can respond to simple verbal cues in those first moments of sleep onset, the hippocampus has already stopped encoding the interaction. You are technically perceiving things. You hear the noise, you feel the blankets. But the machinery required to transfer those perceptions into your memory drive has gone offline. This decoupling is fascinating because it means that wakefulness and memory formation are not the same thing. You can be briefly awake and alert without your memory being engaged, but you cannot remember something without the hippocampus performing its specialized tasks. By shutting down early, the hippocampus protects the brain's internal ecosystem,
but at the cost of the last several minutes of your waking life. Your memory isn't deleted. It simply never existed in the first place because the record button was unpressed as you faded into sleep. Have you ever woken up in the middle of a phone call or a
late-night chat only to find you have no idea what you just said? This phenomenon is a specific form of retrograde amnesia. Researchers have found that if you wake someone up just seconds after they've drifted off, they usually can't remember anything from the several minutes preceding their sleep. This suggests that memory needs more than just the moment of an event to become permanent. It requires a period of stabilization, sometimes called consolidation, even at the micro level. Memory takes time to set, much like wet concrete. When you fall asleep, that setting process is abruptly interrupted. This 5-minute rule explains why thoughts about your upcoming schedule, reflections on the day, or even a podcast playing in the background simply disappear from your narrative of the night. Studies by researchers like Ian Oswald discovered that people in the transitional stage could respond to tones or stimuli, suggesting they were technically conscious or close to it. Yet, upon awakening a few minutes later, the awareness of that stimuli was gone. It isn't just about the state of sleep, it's about the disruption of the flow of data. The interruption of the memory circuit during sleep onset creates a backdated window of forgetting. This temporary loss of immediate memory ensures that your transition isn't just physical, but psychological. It's an abrupt severing of your timeline, effectively resetting the now, so that the conscious self ceases to maintain the logs of the day. At the heart of this memory blurring event is a battle of brain chemicals. Our sleep-wake transition is controlled by what scientists call the flip-flop switch. This switch resides mainly in the hypothalamus, involving structures like the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, or VLPO. During the day, neurotransmitters like orexin and dopamine act like caffeine for your brain cells, keeping your neurons firing rapidly and keeping you alert. But as evening turns to night, these excitatory chemicals begin to deplete, and the sleep-promoting VLPO sends a wave of GABA throughout the brain. GABA is your brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, essentially the body's natural sedative. Its job is to slow down everything. It suppresses the arousal centers, making communication between distant brain regions slower and less synchronized. When GABA hits the hippocampus and the frontal lobes, the high-speed data transfer that allows you to self-monitor and remember vanishes almost instantly. Imagine trying to drive a car when the transmission suddenly stalls out while the engine is still idling. The parts are there, but they aren't working together anymore. This chemical flood effectively disables the specific circuits required to maintain a persistent narrative of who we are and what we are currently experiencing. We stop knowing that we are ourselves. The biochemical switch is binary. Eventually, it tips all the way to one side, and the record of the moment is silenced in a wash of inhibitory molecules. Before full unconsciousness arrives, we enter a surreal corridor often called the gray zone of consciousness, or hypnagogia. This is that hazy frontier where your mind produces odd imagery, fractal patterns, whispering voices, or the famous sensation of falling that makes your legs jerk awake. While this zone feels rich and vivid, it is inherently difficult to recall, precisely because it resides in the structural wreckage of fading wakefulness. In the hypnagogic state, the logic centers of the prefrontal cortex begin to disengage. Without a logical frame of reference, your experiences are no longer organized as useful memories. It's why dream logic feels so real until you wake up. When the brain transitions through this phase, it is also in the process of severing its ties to the external world through a process called sensory gating. Your thalamus stops passing information from the eyes and ears through to the thinking part of the brain. Because your brain has turned inward and dismantled its organizing principles, whatever happens during this free-form time never makes it into the archives of your life. This twilight state is cinematic and poetic, yet it remains hidden from our narrative history. Even though your mind is intensely active, the gatekeepers of order and recollection have already gone to rest, ensuring the secrets stay secret. Finally, we have to ask why our brains evolved this way. This nightly memory erasure isn't a glitch, it's an efficiency measure. Memory takes energy and requires the synthesis of new proteins. From an evolutionary perspective, storing the useless window while you are simply lying in wait for sleep isn't essential. Forgetting is just as vital as remembering. By shedding those last conscious minutes, our brains ensure a clean break, allowing the focus to shift entirely to restoration. So, while we find the mystery of the missing moment intriguing, it's really just our brain being perfectly well designed. The blank page of your memories as you drift off is proof that the nightly maintenance is already in progress, preparing your mind for the morning ahead.